mother was Jane Rice Nesbitt. My dad was Dale Nesbitt. We lived on a dairy farm back of Andersonburg. It was inherited by my mother's parents, Loy and Annie Rice. We had approximately 80-some acres, and we had dairy cows, we had horses. I was grown up with the horse. At the age of 3, my grandfather introduced me to riding, and we had a lot of horses from a doctor in Carlisle that was into jumping and so forth, and a gentleman from New York who was in the same fix. And they brought their horses every summer for my grandfather to train. Needless to say, I was always put on that horse, and they took him around in circles and things. But we had basically 12 to 20 dairy cows that my brother and I milked by hand at first until we got the milking machine. But from cleaning stalls to working in the fields, baling hay, picking corn, all of those things we did by hand. We had chickens, we raised broilers, and we had the first chickens that were capons in the area. Mr. Coons at school in Blaine wanted mother to come in and show the kids how to caponize chickens. So we made an income from caponized chickens also. And we had eggs and we had pigs. We just did everything. We hunted, we picked up walnuts and hickory nuts and shelled them and dried them and sold them for money. Strawberry patch in the spring, big garden. So yes, I worked my little butt off from 4 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night.
And that's when it started, as early as 4 o'clock in the morning?
Absolutely.
And how young were you when one of the things we've talked to with people again and again is similar to what you said, families work together, families, kids had chores to do in a way they don't now.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how young you were and what your life as a child was like? Did you play in the fields? Just tell me what you did. And
we had plastic horses. I had probably 4 little plastic horses. My brother had a Lincoln log set. We took the logs out in our driveway. We built houses. We had roads and barns. And then we were introduced to a huge pack of all kinds of farm animals as a Christmas present. So we had bukus of neighbor kids coming in playing on our farm. We had a pond. We ice skated in the winter, and we fished. There was no fish to speak of, but we fished anyway. We lived close to the creek. We swam. We built a big dam, according to us, 3 stones high, and made a swimming pool for the neighbor kids. My home was like a magnet. At play practices in high school, the kids all wanted to come to my house because my mother made the best apple pies. One thing I always wanted to do was go to the Blaine Hotel after play practice and have a Coke. Not so. We got to go to my house for Mom's pies. And my parents were always welcoming to my brother and my 2 younger sisters. We had friends all the time that were in and out of our house.
Now, I know the hotel is still there, right?
Oh, yes.
Because every once in a while I would go by and do
Yeah.
a program at the elementary, and I always stop by. That's where the little coffee shop restaurant is, am I correct?
Right.
Right. That's wonderful. So you were very close to Blaine when you were...
Oh, yes. No, there was just a couple miles from Blaine. Andersonburg at that time had a general store. Earl Fisher had the store, and Guy Adele had the garage. And before we became owners of a TV, we would go out there. They would loaf over at the store, the men, and they sent we children over to Guy Adele. In their kitchen, they had a TV, and we could sit in there and watch the TV.
So you went to somebody else's house to
Oh,
watch?
yes, yeah.
Now, the word you just used, I love. You said they went to loaf. And I heard that yesterday from somebody, first time I'd heard it, that it, not as a derogatory term, it means kind of
They
passing...
sat there and talked and smoked their cigars and their pipes and whatever. Yeah, they were there for a couple of hours. That's something. My grandfather used to ride his horse out. He had one special place to tie it. And when it was time for him to go home, however the horse got loose, it would come to the steps of the porch, and it was time to go home.
So the horse knew when it was
Oh,
time?
yes.
That's
He
great.
did.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love, because also when the people were loafing, as if farmers
Yeah.
ever really
Yeah.
loaf,
Right.
they were also sort of building community. They were
Oh, my.
talking,
Yes.
they were learning about who needed help, who had
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
can you talk about the sense of community that existed in these small? You said, well, there was a store and there was a garage, and in these smaller communities, can you talk about life in a small community, how that's different than today?
Oh, my goodness. We had no locked doors. If someone came to the front porch at our farmhouse, they were a stranger because nobody used the front porch. They came around the walkway to the kitchen door. You would come home many times and find something baked on the table inside the kitchen. A neighbor had dropped by and they made this. We at Fosnot Day, we had a red wagon. Mother and my grandmother and an aunt would make donuts early in the morning, and we had raised donuts, different kinds of donuts on this wagon covered with tablecloth. And we went to 3 neighbors. That's all the further we could ever go with our wagon, because by then they were done, and you would take their donuts in exchange for your donuts, or whatever they deemed to give us. And back home we came. The funny part of it was when we got as far as Couchtown, we were not allowed to bring certain people's things home because my grandfather said they never learned how to cook. So that was always his philosophy.
That's great. So what generation were you on the farm?
Well, I would have been the 3rd generation.
Is that farm still in your family?
It is. It's now in my nephews, yeah. My brother died some years back. He was younger than I. And then my 2 sisters came 12 and 13 years later. I always said Mother must have felt she needed to punish us because we had these 2 younger siblings. But we learned how to milk the cows. We learned how to feed the little calves with, you stuck your fingers in their mouths, and that enticed them to stick their head in a bucket with milk and water in. They went from the nipple on the bottle into this bucket. Thus, they drank buckets of milk and water.
And you taught them how to do that?
Taught them how to do that.
That's
Yes, we did.
Great. Is there anything you'd like to wrap? Is there any, well, in your nephew's farm, in what way has it changed for him?
Oh, my goodness. It went from us maintaining the farm back in the 50s into the 60s. My brother came home from the Air Force because my dad had a diabetic problem. And Mother could no longer get out and do the work she normally did. She was an only child, so all of the work fell on her shoulders unless my grandfather hired someone. So when my brother and I became of, 6 to 8 years of age, we then could carry milk, we could carry water to the pigs, to the chicken houses, gather the eggs and things. And we learned early on how to hoe and plant vegetables. We would usually, we had Max Riepsom's funeral yesterday, and some of the children in that time span came to my grandparents to shell peas and to pick beans and potatoes. We always had a big potato patch. And the one little girl, well, she's now in her 40s, she said to me, I remember picking those little tiny potatoes, and we could have the buckets of them because your grandfather didn't want them, and we could take them home and Mom would boil them, and we had potatoes and ham. I remember those things.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
But the nephews no longer farm. They now work, and they rent to the Trout brothers. They rent the farm acreage to them.
That's been one of the big changes, the consolidation of the farm.
Yes,
And
yes.
for your farm of 80 cows, was that a
No,
large?
we had 20.
20.
12 to 20. The acreage was 80.
Oh, 80. Okay. So what size farm would that have been considered with 20?
It was a medium farm. It was medium.
Yeah.
Because we had the chickens And Mother, of course, had the capons, which we killed and sold them as a dead body to someone to eat. But we always had ducks also, and just everything. It was a self-contained, if you will. We sold the milk to what was Hershey Enterprises then. We had 3 cans, and we were pretty proud of the 3 cans of milk we sold. You know, it was usually, I think, every other day or every day, I forget now what, the milk truck would come and pick up the milk and take it. But that was the only check that I ever remember seeing in my mother's hand. It was a milk check. We sold eggs to Keller's. They had the big egg franchise then. But we had our little scale. We weighed them, put them in their boxes in the basement, cleaned them, and life went on. We always had plenty to eat. If anything I enjoyed eating was a piece of fish. We had steak from our beeves we butchered. We had the pigs. We had the chickens. And what more did you want except that piece of fish? We hunted, my brother and I both hunted at a young age, mainly because my father had the diabetes and he couldn't be trusted every day out with this gun hunting. So we in turn went with him. We always had a bag of candy in case he had a problem. We could give him candy. So
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.